What if love isn't found, but remembered? What if that spark you call destiny is just an ancient echo, a familiar vibration buried in your nervous system, whispering, "This feels like home"? We grow up believing that attraction is a mystery, that chemistry is alchemy, that we fall in love because of magic, a scent, a smile, a random coincidence that just feels right. But neuroscience tells a far stranger story. We don't fall in love by chance. We repeat patterns written before memory began. In the first years of life, your brain built an invisible map, a neural template of what love feels like. Warmth, distance, chaos, silence. Whatever surrounded you became the definition of love, not through words, but through nervous systems syncing, eyes meeting or avoiding, voices soft or sharp. This is the attachment blueprint, the silent architecture of every relationship you'll ever have. Decades later, you meet someone, and something inside you hums with recognition. Your heart races, your mind floods with meaning, and you tell yourself, "I just know." But what you're recognizing isn't the other person. It's the emotional atmosphere of your childhood. Your body remembers. That's why we're drawn to the unavailable, the unpredictable, the ones who make us chase. Why we call anxiety passion and peace boredom. Because safety, if it wasn't familiar, feels foreign, and foreign feels wrong. So we chase the storm, not the calm, confusing adrenaline with love, familiar pain with destiny. This is the cruel paradox of attraction. The more your early experiences were chaotic, the more chaos feels like connection. You meet someone consistent and kind, and something inside whispers, "No spark." But that absence of spark is not absence of potential. It's the discomfort of entering an emotional climate your nervous system never learned to breathe in. The truth is unsettling. You're not fully choosing who you love. Your brain is running a code, a pattern recognition system, searching for what it already knows. And what it knows best is not what's healthiest, but what's familiar. Yet, within that realization lies power. Because once you see the code, you can start to rewrite it. Awareness breaks the spell. When you understand that chemistry is often recognition disguised as passion, you stop asking, "Who do I want?" and start asking, "What part of me is choosing?" Every attraction becomes data, not destiny. Every spark becomes an invitation to look deeper. Is this love or is this memory? Long before we spoke our first words, we were already learning the language of love. Not from stories or fairy tales, but from faces leaning over us, voices that soothed or ignored, arms that reached for us or didn't. Love begins as biology. Eye contact becomes oxygen. Touch becomes safety. Attention becomes existence itself. And from these early exchanges, the blueprint is drawn, a silent instruction manual for the heart. Maria never knew she carried one. On paper, her life looked complete. A brilliant architect, confident, independent, admired. But every time she met someone steady and kind, she felt nothing. No spark, no pull. It was the charming, inconsistent men who lit her up, the ones who promised warmth, then disappeared into silence. Her friends said she had bad taste, but Maria wasn't choosing badly. She was choosing familiarity. As a child, her father had loved her in doses, measured, unpredictable. His affection arrived like weather, beautiful when it came, but impossible to control. Maria learned that love was something to earn, not something to rest in. Years later, her nervous system still equated unpredictability with love. Consistency felt suspicious. Peace felt dull. Her body only relaxed in tension, because that's where it first learned what love meant. We all carry such invisible blueprints. Some of us learned to chase, others to withdraw. Some learned that love required performance, others that love demanded silence. We adapted perfectly to survive, and then mistook those survival strategies for personality. That's why relationships confuse us, because the heart isn't choosing a partner, it's seeking its original pattern. And when it finds someone who vibrates at the same emotional frequency as our earliest love, it calls that chemistry. But the blueprint can evolve. Awareness redraws the lines. When you notice your own patterns, the loop begins to loosen. You can pause before the familiar pull, Breathe into the discomfort of peace and whisper to yourself, "This is not boredom, this is safety. I'm just not used to it yet." That's how rewiring begins, not by forcing yourself to love what feels wrong, but by slowly teaching your nervous system that safety can feel like home too. Love then becomes less of a search and more of a remembering, not of the pain that shaped you, but of the wholeness that waited underneath it. Desire is not random. It is memory disguised as magnetism. We think we fall for someone's smile, their energy, their mystery, but what truly pulls us is the echo of what we've disowned in ourselves. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the hidden side of our psyche, where everything we reject, suppress, or forget about ourselves goes to live. Not just darkness, but potential. Not just fear, but freedom. The shadow is vast, and it is patient. It waits for someone to walk into our lives and carry what we cannot bear to hold. That's why opposites attract. The disciplined are drawn to the wild, the rescuers to the wounded, the independent to the dependent. Each sees in the other a mirror of their own unlived life. Sarah was known for her light, empathetic, spontaneous, radiant. When she met David, calm, analytical, anchored in logic, she felt instantly safe. His steadiness soothed her chaos. His presence felt like gravity. But soon that same calm began to suffocate her. He didn't feel her moods. He couldn't meet her depth. The warmth she'd mistaken for safety now felt like distance. David, meanwhile, was captivated by her energy, her unpredictability, her fire. She embodied everything his disciplined life had starved of feeling, but as he fell deeper, her emotions overwhelmed him. He admired her intensity until it started to frighten him. They weren't really in love with each other. They were in love with their own shadows. Sarah was meeting her repressed stability. David was meeting his buried chaos. Each saw in the other the parts of themselves they had never dared to become. This is the hidden economy of attraction. We trade unconscious material in the currency of romance. We call it chemistry, but it's projection, our psyches trying to recover lost fragments of self. And when those fragments are retrieved, the spell begins to fade. The lover becomes human. The projection collapses. We feel betrayed, not realizing it was never them we were chasing, but our own completion reflected in their eyes. That's why passion burns bright, then cools into disappointment. It's not failure, it's revelation, the light of consciousness dissolving illusion. To love consciously is to see the shadow at play, to ask, what is this person showing me about myself? To hold desire as a compass, not a chain. Because the one who triggers you the most is often carrying the piece of you that's been waiting to come home. Some loves are not born from chemistry, but from wounds that recognize each other. Two nervous systems meeting in the dark, each whispering, "I know this pain." We call it fate, we call it connection. But often it's repetition, the unconscious seeking resolution. Sarah grew up reading weather patterns, not in the sky, but in her father's moods. His drinking turned the house into a climate of chaos, some days sunlight, others thunder. She became a master forecaster of emotion, detecting storms before they hit. Her gift was survival, her curse was vigilance. Years later, she met men who felt like home to her nervous system, the charming, unpredictable ones. Around them she came alive. Her body knew what to do: fix, soothe, rescue, adapt. Peaceful men made her anxious. She mistook calm for danger. Her trauma had trained her to feel safe only in crisis. That's how trauma hides, not as memory but as attraction. The body remembers what the mind forgets, and the heart keeps choosing the familiar ache over the unfamiliar peace. Michael's story was different, but his pattern danced to the same rhythm. He was the caretaker, the boy who grew up too soon. When his mother's mind unraveled, he learned to hold the pieces together, to anticipate, to protect, to never need. Love to him meant responsibility. So when he met Lisa, gentle, quiet, fragile, his instincts ignited. She didn't have to ask for care. He gave it before she spoke. At first, it was beautiful. He felt strong. She felt seen. But soon, the sweetness turned heavy. Michael grew exhausted, Lisa felt smothered. Each was reenacting an old script they didn't know they were performing. Trauma is clever that way. It writes its own plays and casts us without permission. Until we learn to read the script, we keep acting out the same story with different faces and names. Healing begins with recognition, not judgment, awareness. The moment you notice your pattern, the trance begins to break. You realize that love doesn't have to hurt to feel real, that peace isn't emptiness, that safety doesn't have to be earned. To love after trauma is to retrain your entire body to trust calm again. To sit in stability long enough for your nervous system to stop waiting for danger. It's to breathe and say, this unfamiliar quiet, maybe this is what healing sounds like. The dance changes when one partner decides to stop following the music of the past. That's how cycles end, not with perfection, but with consciousness. We think we choose partners, but often culture chooses for us, whispering through movies, songs, and screens what love should look like, what happiness must feel like, and who we're allowed to want. We grow up on fairy tales of perfect matches, soulmates who complete us, happy endings with no shadows. Then we enter a world of dating apps, filters, algorithms, endless profiles, a marketplace of hearts. Love becomes a product, and we become consumers. Every swipe is a small prayer. Show me perfection. But perfection is a mask, a performance that hides the real work of intimacy. We learn to fall for images, not essences, to value novelty over depth, to chase chemistry and flee discomfort. We confuse the high of possibility with the peace of connection. The collective unconscious has evolved new archetypes: the self-improved lover, the eternal seeker, the spiritual influencer who preaches vulnerability but fears being seen. Our culture worships independence, yet we crave devotion. We romanticize chaos, yet we fear boredom. We want the thrill without the surrender. This is the cultural shadow of love, the parts of human connection we've repressed: imperfection, patience, forgiveness, ordinary tenderness. They don't sell well, they don't trend. So we hide them behind curated intimacy and polished captions. No one tells us that love is seasonal, that real connection asks for time, for silence, for the humility of repair. We've mistaken comfort for stagnation, conflict for incompatibility, and growth for inconvenience. The paradox is cruel. The more options we have, the less capable we become of choosing. Abundance breeds apathy. When every person is replaceable, no one feels sacred. But love is not a performance to optimize. It's an organism to nurture. It needs friction, honesty, time. The algorithm can't measure that. The screen can't feel that. To free ourselves from the cultural shadow is to remember what love truly is: a practice, not a product; a mirror, not a market; an act of presence in a world addicted to distraction. Maybe the revolution of love isn't about finding the perfect person, but about reclaiming our capacity to stay when things get real, to see imperfection as invitation, to trade endless searching for conscious devotion. Most relationships begin as projection, two half-awake souls, each seeing in the other what they most long to reclaim. We don't fall in love with a person, we fall into a mirror. At first, the reflection is beautiful. It feels divine, transcendent, fated. We look into their eyes and see possibility, but as time moves, the light shifts, the reflection changes, and the person we thought we loved reveals their humanness. That's when most people run, not because love died, but because illusion did. This is where real relationship begins, in the ashes of projection, when the fantasy fades and we meet the soul behind the symbol. Elena and Marcus began in fire. She was order, he was chaos. Her discipline met his art. Her certainty met his wild. Together they created a symphony of opposites, until the music stopped making sense. Her structure became control. His freedom became carelessness. The very qualities that once completed them now clashed like rival gods. But instead of running, they stayed. They faced what most avoid, their own reflections, shattered and true. Elena began to paint again, not to impress him, but to remember herself. Marcus started keeping promises, not to please her, but to grow into his word. Each stopped asking the other to be their missing piece and began becoming whole. That is the alchemy of conscious partnership. The fire that once burned with infatuation becomes the furnace of transformation. Love ceases to be a feeling and becomes a discipline, a daily act of awareness, forgiveness, and choice. Conscious love is not easy. It will expose everything you hide, your fear of rejection, your hunger for control, your craving to be seen, and your terror of being known. But within that exposure lies freedom, because only what is seen can be healed. True partnership isn't about harmony. It's about wholeness. It's about two evolving beings creating a container strong enough to hold both light and shadow, where conflict becomes communication and differences become doorways to depth. When we stop trying to fix our partners and start understanding them, love shifts from transaction to transformation. It stops being about what we get and becomes about who we become. That's the sacred work. To love not because it's easy, but because it awakens you. To stay not because you must, but because you choose, and again, as both of you become something new. At some point, every seeker of love must face the truth. The union we've been searching for is not out there. It's inside. Carl Jung called it the sacred marriage, the merging of the masculine and feminine within one soul. It is the reconciliation of opposites, the balance of focus and flow, of logic and intuition, of will and surrender. We spend years projecting these polarities outward, chasing partners who embody what we have not yet claimed in ourselves. We fall for strength when we've disowned our own. We crave softness when we've lost touch with tenderness. We look for grounding in others because we haven't yet rooted in our own being. But every love that fades, every heartbreak that burns, every mirror that cracks, is an initiation. Each relationship dismantles the illusion that completion lives in another, until one day we realize that the lover we've been seeking has been within us all along. To integrate the inner masculine is to find purpose, direction, clarity. To integrate the inner feminine is to rediscover intuition, emotion, receptivity. When these two forces unite, something extraordinary happens. We become whole, not perfect, whole. From this wholeness, love ceases to be a search. It becomes a sharing. We no longer choose from hunger but from abundance, no longer out of fear of being alone, but from the joy of being complete. This is what the mystics meant when they said, love is not something we find, but something we are. The union within births clarity without. We attract not those who fill our voids, but those who harmonize with our fullness. And when two whole beings meet, they create not dependency, but expansion. Their love becomes service, a space where both can grow, a temple where shadow and light coexist in peace. Wholeness is not the end of desire, it is the transformation of it. Desire no longer pulls from lack, but radiates from presence. It's the difference between needing love and being love. This is the ultimate paradox. We spend our lives seeking another, only to discover that what we were chasing was our own reflection waiting to return home. So when you next feel the ache of longing, pause before you search outward. Ask instead, which part of me is calling for reunion? Which half of my soul is ready to be embraced? Because when the sacred marriage happens within, everything outside begins to align. Love stops being a destination and becomes a mirror of consciousness itself. Love was never meant to complete you. It was meant to reveal you. Every attraction, every heartbreak, every moment of surrender and resistance, all of it has been your initiation into consciousness. You weren't failing at love. You were being shaped by it. When we finally understand this, the search ends. We stop chasing and start seeing. We recognize that every person who entered our life was a teacher wearing the mask of a lover, and that every ending was simply another doorway to awakening. The real question is no longer, who will love me? But how fully am I willing to love, here now as I am? Because when love becomes awareness, nothing is missing. And when awareness becomes love, everything becomes sacred. If this journey awakened something in you, subscribe to Alchemy of Mind and continue walking with us through the hidden architecture of the soul.